You can remember these scenes from the Michael Jackson case, from the O.J. Simpson case, etc. This tremendous feeling of nervous tension that is by the news media not just spread out, but also intensified. And then there was an acquittal, and then that was the trigger for an immense amount of rioting. The biggest riot, the biggest and most violent riot that America had seen in April 29, 1992. Here you can see examples of it. This immense plain of suburban city all of a sudden catching fire, and against the backdrop of the mountains, the orange smog, etc. One of the biggest, and then you can see how this riot that started out in the South Central, which is where one of the poorest and also one of the most ethnic areas of Los Angeles, you can see a certain type of rioting going on here. Of course, you don't have these dense blocks like you had, or even like you had in England or even in Detroit. You have these endless, stretched out avenues that go on for miles and miles, and with houses, just suburban houses lined on them, still very poor. And so what you can see is events happening on street corners, where the through traffic, where the traffic crosses the neighborhoods, so where a secondary road meets a primary road, on those corners you can see that a lot of the violent incidents started happening. And one of the most horrifying incidents here, especially again because there was this permanent presence of news media circling around it in helicopters, reporting on everything all the time. You can see that everything that happened live from 15 different angles, being blasted into your house through television, through radio, etc. What happened was a white truck driver called Reginald Denny was driving his truck with, I think it was filled with sand, through this street. And then he tried to go around the burning cars and the roadblocks, and then he couldn't, he had to stop. Then the rioters ran up to the car, opened it, dragged him out, and started taking huge rocks and throwing them down on his head and trying to kill him in that way. The funny thing was that it was not, so while the news media was also a kind of instigator of these riots, the news media also saved this guy, because it was through the news media that a guy who was watching TV, watching the riots, all of a sudden realized that this is happening like around the corner from where he lived. So he thought, I have to do something. So what he saw what was happening on his own block on television, realized that, ran out of the house and tried to save Reginald Denny, and then Reginald Denny survived. Here you can see the fighting going on. So this is a kind of, again, one of our reconstructions of the event, and this is just one sample of an event. There were hundreds, thousands of these events going on all the time, but somehow this one became the most famous because it was filmed from the most angles. So you can see this riot immediately reproduced itself as images all the time, 24 hours a day. Then another thing that happened, of course, was, maybe you remember this, that the original guy who more than a year before, 10 kilometers away, was beaten up by the police. And then his attackers were acquitted. He himself came on television and pleaded, because he was a kind of this guy was not, he was not a very eloquent person. He was a drunk and an ex-drug dealer, a very poor guy, not very clever. But he was absolutely shocked that through the acquittal of his attackers, this whole city was exploding around him, that he came on television and he pleaded a kind of emotional, incoherent plea in which he, like 10 times after each other, said, "Can't we all get along? Can we all get along? Why can't we all get along? Why don't we all get along?" etc. And this became this kind of not very eloquent, stuttering desperation became one of the most famous quotes of that era, and here it features on Time magazine. Again, you can see all the typical properties of the riots also happening here. So there's, for you, a certain boredom might already set in. You have the National Guard coming in, but you have a curfew being called out. So in this entire area, South Central, Watts, Compton, Crenshaw, south of City Hall, which is of course denotes downtown, there was a curfew between sunrise and between sunset and sunrise. But the first thing, because there are many other things, that makes this riot a lot different from the riots that we have seen up till now, is this permanent presence of news media, flying over the city like mosquitoes, filming everything, following each other, even creating riots where there are none by coming to one place where something was nearly happening, and then people see it on television and they all go there to really start the riot, etc. So the coverage of the riots and the riots itself become indistinguishable. They strengthen each other. They whip it up to a frenzy. This is the scale of this map is enormous. But you can see this is all the 911 calls relating to the riot after just one day, so in the first 24 hours. So what you see is that the riot spreads like wildfire throughout the entire city. And that is very, very special, not just the poor areas, not just the black areas. It spreads throughout the entire city, which is very scary, of course, for the rest of the city. It spreads to Hollywood, for example, West Hollywood, which was always seen to be a kind of affluent. Hollywood kind of borders on the area that is where it becomes poor and very ethnic, but Hollywood itself is still seen as part of the city that is safe. So even Hollywood gets attacked, gets swarmed by the rioters. You can see it on Sunset Boulevard and La Brea, also where it's not supposed to happen, where these people are not even supposed to come. The riots start happening there, fighting with police, shooting, etc. And one of the most interesting things also of this riot is how one of the most dominant images being reproduced all the time by the news media is that of looting. So it's not the dominant image is not just the poor blacks fighting the heavily armed police. No, it is people like my age going shopping basically without paying. Supermarkets are blown open, and before the fire destroys everything, people rush in and they take away everything. They take away, and it's a very interesting sight because people take away entire television sets, but also also this guy, I don't know what he bought. I can't see it here, but people are buying Pampers for their children, cookies, milk, everything. They just go shopping. They just take away everything that they want. And then there are interviews with people on the streets. People who are clearly not violent. They are absolutely not violent, but they come out carrying enormous bags of stuff. And then they ask them, and then reporters, because these reporters are everywhere, the reporters ask them, what are you doing? And they said, well, it's free. Today it's free. We can take whatever we want, so of course we do it. We have children to feed, etc. So they don't say we're stealing, they say it's free today. This interview, you can find these interviews on the internet. It's fantastic. Endless amounts of YouTube films of looters being interviewed in the act. This guy, he bought a huge pencil for his, or he appropriated. In Dutch, there's a term called proletarisch winkelen, which means proletarian shopping. That is what is going on here. But at the same time, there was the looting, and the looting is kind of awful, but nothing like the immense amount of destruction that is going on throughout the city. The stores, after having been looted, they are set on fire. The amount of violence is immense. The police and the army who fight for the supermarkets, for the large supermarkets, are using machine guns, and but also the gangs, the gangsters of these areas also are heavily armed. So there are, I think there were 53 people killed in those days. And then one of the most shocking things of these riots is that the violence turned out to be more structured and more political than you would imagine. There was a very large percentage of violence aimed specifically at Korean shop owners. Because the Korean shop owners, they were the ones who had the little neighborhood shops, also in the poor black areas, and they were being systematically attacked by the looters and the rioters. And then they discovered that they were not being protected by the police. The police just defended the large shops, but not the small shops. So then they started defending themselves. Here are some shops being destroyed, Korean shops destroyed in South Central. A woman the day after. And then the Koreans also had guns. And there was literally battles being waged on the street between Korean shop owners who turned out to have guns, and not just small guns, but big guns. And they got together and they started shooting back at the black and the Latino rioters. And so and then the police, they just thought this is too much, and they tried to somehow consolidate the riots within a certain area. Here's another Korean shop owner. Now, this was not the first time that LA had erupted in riots. In 1965, 26 years before, exactly the same thing seemed to have happened. One of the first, so this is a year or two before the big riots in Detroit that we talked about 2 lectures ago happened. The Watts riots. Watts was a part of South Central that was one of the most famous and one of the most dense and one of the most poor black areas in Los Angeles. The Watts riots happened in the summer of '65, and they were the first